You're listening to episode 14 of The Secular Buddhist. Hi everyone. Today we will conclude part 2 of our interview with the triple gem of the virtual secular Sangha, Linda Blanchard, Jan Ford, and Dana Nuri, on the topic of revitalization movements and how that's impacting us in the early stages of the development of secular Buddhist practice.
So Jan and I have been talking a little bit in Second Life about, so can these be taught independent of Buddhism? I mean, do we need to couch it in Buddhism with the Buddha, whether you want to think of him mythically or historically? Does he really need to be attached to those things?
That'd be the $64,000 question.
Well, I wanted to add something before we get over to that topic, which I think is an important one, and that is this idea of, not exactly how to formulate it, but the idea that the core teachings are always relevant. I think that yes and no, but I think that every historical period, what the meaning that's attributed to those concepts is going to be culturally determined.
Right.
Now the question is what culture are we talking about? Ted, you talked about modern Buddhism. I think that was a term, right?
Yep.
Instead of Western Buddhism, which is a better term. But really, what is that?
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
what I think it is, it's there is a growing global culture made up of highly educated, skilled, professional people. You know, some go in some religious directions, but a lot of people now in that around the world have in common, and they share this new kind of culture. That's growing in the world, but it's growing only for that group of people. And only, in my opinion, I may be overstating this, only that group of people are the ones that are being attracted to the kind of thing that we call Western Buddhism or modern Buddhism. You go to Darfur right now and you try to talk about no self and any of that other stuff, and people are just going to look at you like you were a complete wacko. Because they're sitting there starving to death, being killed all the time, and the last thing they want to do is sit and meditate on mindfulness. You know, and I'm not saying that to put as a put down. I just think that, you know, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, you can get in, unless you've got a lifestyle that's fairly comfortable, it's going to be difficult for you.
Are you actually saying that that's no help, though? That having grasped those concepts and understanding the roots of suffering is going to be no help in Darfur to somebody who is there? Because it seems to me like that the persecuted Tibetans, for example, are strengthened in their situation by actually understanding that.
Well,
that's
I think
true. They hung on to that in spite of being shot at and tortured.
Right.
Tibet
I mean, I understand introducing it. Introducing the concept in the middle of war is probably not helpful,
but it would probably be really helpful if we went into war and had those skills.
Already, yes, we'd be a little less likely to go into the war.
Maybe for some people.
Hopefully, yes.
I think we don't want to romanticize. Tibet is a very complex situation. And, you know, the history there of Buddhist rule was horrendous. It was
I was just talking about
terrible system. And and nowadays, you know, I don't think that the Buddhism of the Dalai Lama and international groups has a lot of relevance for the Tibetan people themselves. A lot of them resent it, you know, and so it's a very complex topic before we draw conclusions about that.
True.
But what I would say about Darfur, for example, is that, you know, who is it that is going to be practicing mindfulness? You know, and who's going to listen? I'm not saying that it might not be a good idea. Let's be clear about that. What I'm saying is that people got to be able to hear something. And at different times in history, they're not going to be able to hear it. I mean, you go talking certain things in the European Middle Ages to people about, let's say, women's equality. You're going to be hung for witchcraft. You know, people aren't going to listen to it because the social conditions are not very favorable to it, even though it's a great idea, you know.
Adding on to that, Jan, there are some suttas in the Pali Canon that talk about exactly that, where the Buddha makes the point that, you know, not everyone's going to become a monk. That's not a rational thought. That's not going to happen. That people really do need to have the basic needs met. That poverty is a great enemy of this because the suffering is so great. People don't have the opportunity to even try to practice because, as you're saying, those basic needs, they got to be met. And
if you're fighting for your life, you don't have time to meditate.
Yeah. And
well,
so
in addition to that, I think people who are telling other people to practice mindfulness have to understand that you know, we're coming from a position where we are, you know, hogging the resources of the world.
Yep.
And what those people don't have to eat, we have to eat. And in the larger context, not we personally, but the you know, the West created that situation. In Africa particularly. If you know anything about the history there, you know that. And so, you know, I'm not saying that to make anybody feel guilty because I hate that whole idea. But I think to understand that all these things are interrelated, which is probably a good Buddhist idea anyway.
It's a good Buddhist idea, yeah.
In other words, and people are not gonna, that's another reason people are not gonna hear people from a global culture.
Right. But is it possible, Jan, that maybe those people don't need it as much as we need it over here?
Well, they
to
need
become more mindful, mindful of how really spoiled we are, how much we're doing, and because we do. I mean, that is one of the things that mindfulness opens us up to, is our situation in the world compared to other people.
I don't want to be misunderstood.
So maybe we are the ones who need it, you know, and maybe they don't need it as much as we do when we go mindfully pigging out and hogging resources and being unmindful of the rest of the world.
Yeah, correct.
And problems, yeah.
I think this raises a good point, is that we often are in a very lucky and comfortable position where we have the opportunity to go to a place to hear a teaching or go to a church or go to, you know, an atheist meeting or a library or whatever.
Logging online on an
Logging online. Yes. Do things that we have a lot of personal time, a lot of personal ability to do what we want to do. And there's probably very few of us, certainly amongst us on this call, and probably very few who are listening to the podcast, who actually are concerned about, am I going to be able to eat tomorrow?
Right.
And that really impacts things, where even as you contemplate, as our friend David is going to become a monastic, there's still not as much of a concern about, you know, yes, he's going to eat twice a day, and so many of us, you know, Americans with our 3 meals a day and, you know, supersize me and all that. That's like, wow, only 2 a day. I'm like, step back a moment.
Some people only get to eat once a week.
Yeah, some people don't get that much, and that's really pretty good. And still having the opportunity to practice and learn, that still can be very comfortable. And I would say that's a very big difference from how it is in a more affluent society that we're enjoying right now, at least here, that other parts of the world don't get to enjoy that. And when there are folks who do take the robes and do the home leaving, they are really, as was more so, I think, in the Buddha's time, whether you look at it as mythical or an historical accounting, they're really taking their lives in their hands. They may not make it through the rainy season. You may die in a flood or of dysentery or whatever, and that's not something we have as much interaction with. Right now in Haiti, that's something that is coming up, that diseases that
Mm-hmm.
We Westerners going there have been inoculated against. It's not a problem for us, and it was so hard finding an inoculation. I was just watching a show last night on CNN that a 15-year-old had died of a disease that we were routinely inoculated for. And it was
the Sean Penn interview, right?
Yeah, yes, and it was very hard for them to even find. It took 11 hours for them to even find the right treatments because it's just so rare. But it happens, and it can progress with exponential speed unless it's taken care of. And these are things that, as we're sitting comfortably on the cushion on our retreats from our jobs, where we have a comfortable living, it's very, very removed from where we are, and Buddha recognized that, and did, at least the people who put the Pali Canon together did put that in there, is that, yeah, poverty is a bad thing. People need to be safe. They need to be able to eat, and that is going to come before our practice of mindfulness.
And many of us Americans are raised in such ignorance. I know when I took my Tibetan Buddhist course, the interdependence of everything really struck me. I was raised to say grace for my food and thank God for it, and thank God for this and that. And in that class, they reconnected me with the fact that my food is grown by people, it's harvested by people, it's packaged by other people, it's put on the shelves by even more people. And before it even gets to me, there's a lot of people there who are supporting me who need to be thanked.
Right.
And it was like, wow, I never even thought about that because I grew up being told, thank God for your food.
Right. And that idea of gratitude is something that we foster and sometimes it's very much in a lip servicey kind of way. And I read last year, Jane Goodall has a book about food and what goes into making it and all that. And for folks listening to the podcast, I'll make sure that I link that on the episode for this episode. And I'd recently, just a few weeks ago, had volunteered at Feed My Starving Children, which is it's a Christian organization that packages food and sends it off to countries where really they are starving. And they had to come up with a particular mix that was something that people who are in their bodies, they are physically in a starving condition, can actually digest. So they had to go through a couple different formulations of the food they were packaging for doing this. And at the beginning of this, they showed us a video, and it was just littered with Bible passages. And I had an inherent kind of tensing of that, and I'm like, okay, I'll just sit through this. And then we did our volunteer work, and we boxed up thousands of meals that would go out. And at the end of it, we had a chance to taste this stuff, which I thought was really, really good. I actually wanted to get some of it. But the idea here being that it's not we hear about engaged Buddhism, and where we can actually put this into practice, and it's in the same way that Buddhism doesn't have a patent on compassion, neither does Christianity have a patent on Christian values and morals. Come on, this predated Christianity by a long time. Compassion is not something that's only to members of a particular sect. It's a people thing. Often we see this as an animal thing. I think it's a living being thing. And we have it lucky, and Jan, kind of segueing back to where we originally came from on all this, is so with our structures, how do we work in and make sure that we continue to foster that equality and that compassion, that we avoid our getting involved with our baser selves as the structures become so large.
Right, and I think the core Buddhist concepts do help that. They help us step out of our ego. They raise our consciousness so that we're aware of others and we're not just caught in ourselves. And that frees us up to recognize and see where we can be of help.
Now, how is that any different? Because I'm channeling, spiritually, I'm channeling my atheist friends who are listening to the podcast and are saying, well, but atheists did that too. And there's nothing spiritual about it. It's the right thing to do.
Right. And some of them may be that way naturally. Some of them may be more informed. I think for some of us, core Buddhist concepts wake us up to those things when we've previously been lost in ourselves. No, there are atheists and humanists who are already caught on to that, and maybe they don't need it to the degree that some of us do.
But as you were describing those who aren't, for folks who can't see, I was raising my hand because I was in that boat of clueless.
Yeah, for the people who are still walking into walls.
Yeah.
Yeah, idea is to have a structure that spreads the meme of compassion and gives us a way to teach our children. I don't think that atheism just naturally comes with that sort of structure, a way to teach and a comprehensive system that teaches the skills that are needed to be able to develop the compassion. And the sooner we do it in our lives, the better, the sooner we do it with our kids and so on. Yeah,
and that's what I see as missing in pure atheism, where it's simply a disbelief, and we still have social get-togethers and all that, but it's our commonality is that disbelief. Same thing with secular humanism that takes a more active, positive stance in society, but I still, one of the things I sense as a missing component is a methodology of putting those fine values, inculcating them into your reflexive action. It's one thing to say, we need to be compassionate and nice, and we all agree with that. Yep, okay, good, thumbs up. But our minds keep getting in the way, and it's very much a Buddhist-y thing to look at mind again. Oh, here's a Buddhist talking about mind again. Like, yeah, but that's not a Buddhist thing. That's a people thing.
See, that's what I was saying about the front door and serving the needs of the culture you're in. I guess Jan can correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty much all cultures that have religion serves the purpose of helping out in a time of need, bringing the community together, support for tough times and celebrating the good times. And that's not something that's a Buddhist strength particularly, or, it's not innate to the core principles of Buddhism because it avoids ritual, the core part of Buddhism, because of the sacrifices and that sort of thing that the Buddha preached against in his time. Ritual is pretty well frowned on in the core Buddhism, although it's sure a part of Buddhism throughout the world nowadays. Mm-hmm. It has been for quite a long time. But for Buddhism to be effective as it changes into a modern Buddhism, it has to answer those sorts of questions and needs, fill those needs that are required in modern society. And so pretty much what Christian churches do with Sunday school, helping to teach the kids moral structure, helping to teach the parents how to teach the kids moral structure, that sort of thing, are the kinds of things we need to incorporate into any sort of new Buddhism if we do structure at all. I guess the question is, should we be aiming for any kind of structure at all? Mm-hmm. Or are we going to just, do free for all? But I really think that there needs to be some sort of structure that we can use to pass on the information, and as a check to make sure that we're actually passing on good information about what Buddhism is, rather than a salad bar.
Jan, what do you think about that?
I think that it's just structure is going to flow to a great extent from the theory. And it may be that we need a new integrative theory that works for our time, and maybe it's something that we could call neo-Buddhism, just like we have neo-evolutionism. But I don't think we have it right now. And what the modern Buddhist movement is doing is stumbling. And that's why, they're picking things from here, from there, could either end up eclectic and useless, or it could, in fact, generate a new understanding, one that takes into account the 21st century, and the conditions in the world that we live in. We think India in the Buddha's time had poverty. There's never been poverty in the world like there is today in terms of the numbers of people. I mean, even starving village people had resources that these huge poverty areas in the world don't have right now.
Was that a function, Jan, of the is the poverty itself worse today, or are the conditions the same, but there are simply lots more people because we have 6 billion people on the planet now?
Yeah, and 20% of them live on $1 a day or less.
Yeah.
But no, I'd say it's more than that. For example, I mean, we've deforested, for example, huge parts of the world. And if you go back a couple of thousand years ago when those forests were there, I mean, at least people could survive, on the bounty of that forest, even if their crops failed. I'm not saying that there wasn't terrible problems in the Middle Ages. I don't think there were very many terrible problems when everybody was hunting and gathering, because the ratio of people to resources was different. But just the toleration, the fact that there's 650 billionaires in the world, and the combined wealth of those billionaires is equal to the bottom 20% of the world's population. And the world's population is about 6.7 billion people, so 20% of that's how much, and these 650 families or people have compared to all those people. That's incredible.
The two thoughts come to mind. One is, wow, how do I get that job? Because I do good things with that money. I keep thinking, and I know this is, I think of the old Zen adage where it's, there's a new emperor and I think Takuan or whoever visits him and says, how will you rule the people? And he says, well, with justice and compassion. And the monk says, oh, well, then they're going to suffer endlessly. And the point there being that it's your version of what compassion and justice is may not really be so. And the other thing that comes to mind, Jan, you had mentioned that you had said where we're stumbling now, and I'm wondering more if we're going to move back to that, as where do you see, and Dana and Linda join in, is where do we see that we're stumbling in this very, very early stage? Because it's critical for us to get a good foundation for this movement, whether it's modern Buddhism or a secular kind of Buddhism, however we want to spin it, however we want to call it, and it may be several different permutations. Where are we stumbling? What do we need to do better that we're not doing right now?
I believe one problem that we suffer from in this movement is ultra-individualism, which is a dangerous kind of idea, but very attractive in our culture. And ultra-individualism is, ends up focusing in on self-development, let's see what the Chinese had a word for that. What was and I think that and I would say, and you correct me if you don't agree, at the expense of compassion for all beings, or just compassion for people in general. We're too busy trying to get our own personal stuff together, and we neglect, we're saddened by these kind of things, the poverty and the war, the killing and the disease and so on, but not enough to stop us from going on retreat, and in the retreat dealing simply with our own psychological issues. And again, I don't want to be misunderstood in saying that that's not a good thing to do from an individual standpoint. But I'm talking about a movement that would include both individual, like in your last podcast, what quality of what was that definition you had of enlightenment or awakening?
that Will had said, Will Davidson, a couple of podcasts ago had said that really where the quality of one's enlightenment is how it's put into practice and how it affects your relationships with others. And I'm paraphrasing here, but he phrased that beautifully, and that's what you're getting at is, although we certainly need, in order for us to do that properly, we do still need to go on retreat and develop ourselves so that we can have that positive interaction, but we need to not stop at the point of our own personal development. We need to then carry it into those interactions.
And it's a dialectical relationship because, you work on that aspect of the contradiction, then you go out and, work with compassion with people, and then takes you to a higher level, so you can go back and work on yourself with a new level of understanding that's actually much deeper, and back and forth.
Right, it is a self-feeding system. But I do see that that's what we're missing in secular Buddhism too, is engaged Buddhism. And I know for myself, I feel like I'm floundering a little bit in that there is no systematic approach for me in my own practice. I'm fumbling on my own now because I've rejected the other traditions. And I don't feel like I have a lot of guidance because I don't trust the guidance that's out there. So I don't know if that's a personal issue.
Right,
that's right.
Yeah, because we have a methodology for our personal development. We have the Eightfold Path, and we have our meditation practice, and it's very systemized. And all of us from our own personal experiences know that this works, and this really helps us improve as people. But where I think we're getting at is we don't have that same systemized approach of here's how you do this engagement, here's how you carry it forward.
Right, and there aren't other people that I can go to as an organization to go help or to donate money to that I can trust it's going to go out to the right people and so forth. The Tibetan Buddhists are pretty good at this with engaging in the world and helping and so forth. A lot of it, of course, goes to China and Tibet, and some other groups too, but I don't belong to those groups anymore, And so it would be nice if we had some structure around that.
Although compassion and charity from a Buddhist isn't limited to doing it through Buddhist structures.
Well, and that's right.
Like Ted doing his work through a Christian organization and having to sit quietly while he listens to a couple of lectures and then go out and do the good work.
And that's okay, but the concern that I had during that, and this is something, again, right now I'm channeling P.Z. Myers, because he raised this on his blog for Angela within the past week or two, that the trouble with those organizations is there is a chance, and I'm not saying this about Feed My Starving Children. I just want to make that clear to folks listening. Right. Is that there is the potential abuse by some organizations where we will be handing out the food that starving people desperately need at this church, and we will be proselytizing our faith during that. We're not actually doing this in order to feed you and take care of you because it's the right thing to do. We have an agenda. And it's how to remove the agenda from compassion, where it can't be just compassion by itself and you're not working in and by the way, support our church. Whatever it is, or organization, whether it be secular or whatever, I think it just needs to be removed from that.
Right, and for myself, I go through other organizations. My personal views that I'm still attached to concerning Christianity, I just can't do what you're doing. Although I'm working on those views, they still prevent me from interacting with the Christian churches in any way.
I mean, that's just voting with your feet.
Right.
You're basically you're putting your efforts into doing volunteer work with groups that don't push their agenda.
Right.
If it's an agenda you don't agree with, I think that there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing I was going to say that I think that we're not quite getting right is opening ourselves to dialogue with other groups. I mean, the whole problem where we started from is dogma. Dogma is the big issue. And I really don't want to see this form of Buddhism fall into a dogma that, we have the one and the only right form.
Ours is the one true Buddhism.
Yeah. And I mean, there are so many different varieties springing up right now that we all need to keep an open dialogue, I think, and a lot of tolerance and a lot of compassion for all of the other people out there struggling to figure out, what it was that the Buddha actually did teach.
I was thinking about that same point when it was about a week ago. I was on Facebook, and they have those ads on the right.
Right.
And they send you suggestions of groups based on what you've said I want to hear about. And I'd received this invitation to a local group here in the Twin Cities that's kind of an interfaith dialogue kind of group where it was people from many different religions, and I was about to hit the button to join this because I thought that sounds really interesting. And I realized, I'm like, well, wait, that's going to be kind of weird, me being the atheist, non-religious guy joining this religious multiple organization. As I think about it with what you've been saying, Linda, is, you know what? You're right. We need to not shy away from that. We do need to engage.
Because we have a voice too.
Right, we have a voice too, and that came up in
and we share a lot of concerns for the world with them. And that's what I keep trying to remind myself, because I still fall into anger a lot over religions. And so I'm trying to remind myself of they're all empty too, you know, and those religions and those groups have something that those people need, but we share these other things in common.
My only caveat would be that, we don't want our good efforts necessarily to, make, let's say, Christianity more popular. And that's why.
Right. That's
Linda,
always my concern.
Linda was talking about organization, and why would you want to build up a new type of Buddhist organization? But because the organization will enable people to practice good works within, and that Buddhism, or whatever you want to call it, is getting the credit for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Right. And that, if that organization and that theory, cultural theory, is a good one, then they should get credit for it. So you can do that without running around bad-mouthing other organizations. You do it by your practice, you know.
Right.
I'm just
and that's what I wanted to ask too. What I don't quite understand, and it's only my lack of knowledge, is what makes a religion to the point of being able to have that tax break? And we called a religion, right?
Yes,
I mean, there are cults and there are groups.
There are enough people who point their fingers towards it and say that's what it is. That's all.
When you have to prove to the government to prove it's a religion. I mean,
well, actually, I can tell you that because I looked into this. As there are requirements. I looked into this when I became this is a confession moment.
Universal Life Church.
Universal Life Church, exactly. You're so with me. Yeah, I became an ordained person through the Universal Life Church online because it enabled me to legally perform weddings. And I've done like 20 plus weddings. I'm doing a wedding for an old friend of mine in a few months, and it's great fun. It's wonderful to do, and they get the ceremony they want. They don't have to go to, well, you're getting ceremony number 37 at this church. No. You guys tell me what you want me to say. This is your day, not mine. And unfortunately, funerals as well, including like my mom's and brothers. Those are great fun, but they needed to be done. So when you have something like that, I was checking into, well, okay, so what, out of curiosity, what's involved with becoming an actual church? What does that involve? And it varies from state to state. And here in Minnesota, at least at the time I was investigating it, and I think this will answer the question, Dana, is that you needed to have regularly scheduled meetings of not more or not less than 3 people. And they had the very specific. So basically, you have your Sunday morning congregation needs to get together, and you had to have a designated person as your religious leader, your priest, your minister, your whatever you wanted to call them, and that would enable you to apply for the tax exempt status for a religious organization. So it varies, but that was the basics of it, and it's very much a legal designation. So my spirituality, my holiness in the Universal Life Church is strictly a legal designation.
I can see it now. Danaism.
Except I change my mind so often, people wouldn't be able to keep up with me.
Well, so
who can know the mind of Dana?
Yeah, you live in mysterious ways, Dana. I've heard this all the time.
Well, that's one word for it.
I think on that note, we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes. So I think what we'll do is we'll kind of draw things to a close now. Any final words before we draw this probably part 2 of the podcast to a close?
3 marks of existence. I stumbled
you.
earlier. I couldn't remember the 3 what, so.
And when you said that, my mind went blank as well. 3
Yeah.
marks of resistance.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I'd leapt forward to the Pali of dukkha, anicca, and anatta.
Right.
Yeah.
So
That's
now
what
my
I was
brain's
talking
working. Oh, sure. Thanks, brain. Nice timing.
That's probably another problem with turning this into a popular belief system. You know, the throwing in of Indian
Right?
languages.
Yeah, yeah. Dana, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Jan, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ted.
Linda, joyous to see you as always. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And everyone, thanks for listening. If you would like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com. Each episode has its own page with show notes, references, and links to source materials. You'll also find resources on Buddhism, critical thinking, secularism, and links to the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi. John Kaizen Neptune and Taihei Shakuhachi's websites are both linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment, every single moment, you have a choice. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.